The morning sun bathed the backyard in a golden glow as Jake Reynolds stood on his porch, sipping his coffee. His small but vibrant garden stretched before him, a neat, colorful patch of vegetables, herbs, and flowers. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a piece of history. His grandfather had planted the first seeds here decades ago, and Jake had kept the tradition alive. Life on Maplewood Lane was peaceful, until Karen moved in next door. Karen Turner, self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac, had barely unpacked her overpriced furniture before she started issuing complaints. First, it was the height of the neighbors' fences. Then, it was the unsightly bird feeders that attracted too many birds. And now she had her sights set on Jake's garden. Jake had ignored her previous comments, but today, as he stepped off the porch, something was off. His garden looked wrong. The rows of tomatoes, the basil, the sunflowers, all gone. The soil was uneven, freshly dug up like a pack of wild hogs had stormed through. A pit the size of a jacuzzi gaped in the center. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, setting his coffee down on the railing. Then he saw her. Karen stood proudly on her patio, hands on her hips, admiring the destruction. A couple of workers stood nearby with shovels, looking confused but obedient. A cement truck idled at the curb. "You're welcome," Karen called out, flashing a smug smile. "I'm expanding my patio. You really should thank me. Your little weed patch was such an eyesore." Jake's blood boiled. "You tore up my garden." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she huffed. "I thought you appreciate the upgrade. It'll raise property values." Jake clenched his fists. This wasn't just about vegetables. It was about respect, about boundaries, about the fact that Karen had waltzed onto his property like she owned the place and decided his land was hers to reshape. Then something caught his eye. In the churned-up dirt among the tangle of roots and broken tomato vines was something metal, something round, something old. Karen hadn't just destroyed his garden. She had unearthed something big. Jake stormed toward the dug-up patch, his boots sinking into the loose dirt. Karen, oblivious to his rising fury, continued chattering about her vision for an extended patio with a built-in fire pit. But Jake wasn't listening. His focus was on the half-buried metal container glinting in the morning light. He knelt and brushed the soil away. The container was a rusted metal box, its lid sealed tight. His pulse quickened. This wasn't just some random piece of junk. He knew exactly what it was. Karen, finally noticing his interest, sighed dramatically. "Oh, for heaven's sake, don't tell me you're getting sentimental over some old trash." Jake ignored her. With careful hands, he lifted the box from the dirt. Decades of soil clung to its surface, but beneath the grime, faded lettering was still visible. His heart pounded as he read the words etched into the metal. "Property of Maplewood Historical Society, 1974 time capsule." Karen squinted at the box. "Oh, well, I suppose that's interesting." Jake stood, gripping the capsule tightly. "This isn't just interesting. The town's been looking for this for years." That got her attention. "What do you mean, looking for it?" Jake shot her a glare. "Maplewood buried a time capsule 50 years ago. They lost the exact location when the old records were destroyed in a fire. People have been searching for it ever since." Karen blinked. Her eyes flickered between the box and Jake, then back to the empty hole where his garden had once been. Something shifted in her expression, greed. "Oh, well, that changes things," she said quickly, stepping closer. "Since it was found on my property." Jake laughed bitterly. "Your property? You mean the land you illegally dug up without permission?" Karen's face twitched, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. We're neighbors. We should be working together on this." Jake saw right through her. Karen didn't care about history or the community. She saw an opportunity. And knowing her, she'd do anything to twist this in her favor. "Well," she continued, flashing a tight smile, "since I technically unearthed it, I should probably be the one to hand it over to the town." Jake's jaw tightened. Oh, she was going to play that game. Over his dead body. Jake took a deep breath, tightening his grip on the time capsule. Karen's fake smile barely hid the scheming look in her eyes. He could already picture her standing in front of the local news cameras, acting like she was some hero for finding the lost piece of town history. "Not happening." "Nice try, Karen," he said, brushing the dirt off the metal box. "But this was buried on my land in my garden, which you had no right to dig up." Karen folded her arms, tilting her head like a disappointed teacher. "Oh, Jake, don't be difficult. You weren't even looking for it. If I hadn't had my workers dig, it would still be lost." She gestured vaguely toward the hole, as if expecting him to thank her for destroying his garden. Jake let out a humorless chuckle. "You destroyed my property, and now you want credit for what you found." Karen sighed dramatically. "Oh, don't be so emotional. Look, how about we split the credit? We can both be recognized for this wonderful discovery." Jake narrowed his eyes. "And by split the credit, you mean you'll tell everyone you found it while I stand in the background like an idiot?" Karen didn't even bother denying it. Instead, she smiled sweetly. "Well, I do have a bit more credibility in town. It just makes sense for me to handle the announcement." Jake wasn't about to let her rewrite history. He glanced at the time capsule in his hands, then at Karen's perfectly manicured nails itching to snatch it away. She was relentless, and he knew she wouldn't back down. If he didn't act fast, she'd twist this whole situation in her favor. Then an idea sparked. A slow, calculated grin spread across his face. Karen thought she could steal his moment. Fine. He'd make sure this discovery didn't go the way she planned. Jake kept his expression neutral, but inside his plan was already forming. He knew Karen well enough to predict her next move. She'd spin this into her personal victory, maybe even try to sell the story to the local news. But if she wanted to play dirty, he was more than ready. He dusted off the capsule, pretending to consider her offer. "You know, Karen, maybe you're right. This is a big deal. The town been searching for this for decades. We should handle this properly." Karen's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Exactly, and that's why I think we should take it straight to the mayor's office together." Jake nodded, suppressing a smirk. "Good idea, but before we do that, we should probably check what's inside." Karen's enthusiasm faltered for a second. "Oh, well, is that really necessary? I mean, shouldn't the Historical Society handle it?" Jake shrugged. "Maybe, but what if there's something inside that proves who originally buried it? Some kind of document?" He ran his fingers over the rusted lid. "If we don't check, we might miss something important." Karen hesitated. She clearly wanted the credit, but she also didn't want to risk losing control of the situation. "Fine," she said finally, "but let's be careful. We don't want to damage anything." Jake grabbed a small pry bar from his toolbox on the porch. He wedged it under the rusted lid and worked it open with a loud creak. Karen leaned in, eyes wide with anticipation. Inside, a stack of old newspapers, photographs, and sealed envelopes rested on top of a few artifacts. Coins, letters, a town registry. Jake picked up the top newspaper, the faded headline catching his eye. "MAPLEWOOD time capsule to be buried in community garden, 1974. Jake almost laughed out loud. Community garden, as in not Karen's property. He turned the paper so she could read it, her lips pursed as the realization hit. "Oh," she muttered. "Oh," Jake echoed with a grin. "Looks like this capsule was meant to be on public land. That means it actually belongs to the town, not either of us." Karen's eye twitched. "Well, that's still good news. I mean, I did uncover it, so." Jake cut her off. "You illegally trespassed and destroyed a historical site in the process." He folded his arms, enjoying the way Karen's confident facade cracked. "And I'm sure the mayor's office will be very interested in that part of the story." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she had nothing to say. Jake watched her squirm, savoring the moment. She thought she could bulldoze her way to fame, but now she'd have to answer for her actions. And he wasn't done with her yet. Karen's eyes darted between Jake and the time capsule, her mind scrambling for a way to regain control. But Jake wasn't going to let her off that easily. "You know," he said casually, dusting off another newspaper from the capsule, "I think the town will be real interested in how this was found." He tapped his chin, pretending to think. Imagine the headlines, "Local woman destroys historic community garden while expanding her patio." Corinne's face paled. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "I was just improving the neighborhood." Jake smirked. "Oh, sure. And it's a total coincidence that your improvement just happened to involve digging up my land without permission." Corinne huffed, crossing her arms. "What do you want, Jake?" Bingo, he had her. "Well," he said, feigning deep thought, "first, I want my garden restored, every single plant, and you're going to pay for it." Corinne's nostrils flared, but she stayed silent. "Second," he continued, "I think you should be the one to explain to the town why the capsule was found." She perked up slightly, misreading his words. "Oh, I'd be happy to." Jake held up a finger. "By admitting you trespassed, destroyed property, and almost ruined a piece of town history." Corinne's mouth fell open. I can't do that." Jake shrugged. "Then I guess I'll have to tell them myself, with pictures. Oh, and I'm sure the Historical Society would love to press charges for damages." Corinne's eyes flicked toward the construction workers, who were now watching with mild amusement. Then to the cement truck still idling nearby. She was cornered, and she knew it. Her fingers curled into fists, her face twisting as she tried to find an escape. But there wasn't one. Finally, with a deep, reluctant breath, she muttered, "Fine, I'll fix the garden." "And," Jake prompted, raising an eyebrow. Corinne swallowed hard. "And I'll tell the town what happened." Jake grinned. "See, that wasn't so hard." Corinne shot him a look that could curdle milk, but he didn't care. Because the best part. This wasn't even the real revenge. That part was still coming. Jake knew Corinne wasn't the type to admit defeat easily. Sure, she'd agreed to fix his garden and tell the town the truth, but he could already see her mind working, trying to find a way to spin things in her favor. So he decided to make sure she really learned her lesson. The first step was simple. Before Corinne could control the narrative, Jake made a call to the Maplewood Historical Society and the local news station. He let them know that the long-lost time capsule had finally been unearthed, and that they should come by for the big reveal. The second step, a little theatrical touch. The next morning, Jake stood in his backyard, watching as Corinne's landscapers frantically worked to replace his garden. Under his supervision, of course. He made sure they planted every single vegetable, herb, and flower exactly where they belonged, and he made Corinne foot the bill for the most expensive, high-quality plants available. Corinne, meanwhile, stood to the side, arms crossed, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. But Jake wasn't done yet. Right on schedule, a couple of cars rolled up the street. First, the mayor's office representative, then the Historical Society members, and best of all, a local news crew, cameras ready. Corinne's face drained of color. "You invited the press." Jake gave her his best innocent smile. "Of course, this is a huge moment for the town. Thought you'd be thrilled." She looked like she wanted to strangle him. The reporters wasted no time setting up their cameras. As the interview began, Jake made sure to tell the full story. He spoke about how the time capsule had been buried in the community garden, which was supposed to be protected. He praised the town's history and the significance of the discovery. And of course, he very casually mentioned how it was dug up without permission, and how certain individuals had almost paved over a piece of town history for a patio expansion. Corinne stood frozen, forced to listen as Jake publicly exposed her destruction and greed. When a reporter turned to her, asking for her side of the story, she forced a stiff smile and mumbled something about a misunderstanding. But the damage was done. By the end of the interview, it was crystal clear who the hero was, and who the town menace was. And Jake, he was just getting started. Corinne barely held it together as the reporters wrapped up their coverage. Her usual smug confidence was gone, replaced with a forced, tight-lipped smile. The mayor's representative thanked Jake for preserving an important part of town history, while the Historical Society members openly criticized the damage to the garden. Corinne tried to slink away, but Jake wasn't about to let her escape without a final dose of humiliation. "Wait, Corinne," he called out loud enough for everyone to hear. I think you still have something to say. All eyes turned to her. She stiffened. W what? Jake crossed his arms, enjoying this moment a little too much. You promised to tell the town the truth, remember? The mayor's representative raised an eyebrow. Truth? What truth? Karen shot Jake a venomous look before forcing the fakest, most painful smile imaginable. She cleared her throat. Ah, yes. Well, she looked around as if searching for a way out, but there wasn't one. I may have accidentally disturbed the garden while expanding my patio. Disturbed, Jake echoed with a chuckle. You demolished it. One of the Historical Society members gasped. Wait, you're the one who dug this up. Karen clenched her jaw. It was a mistake. The mayor's representative frowned. A mistake that destroyed a protected historical site. Karen turned a shade of red that almost matched her perfectly manicured nails. I was just trying to improve the property values. That was the wrong thing to say. One of the older Historical Society members scoffed. So, you prioritized your patio over the town's history. The news cameras were still rolling. The whispers in the growing crowd were unmistakable. Karen Turner, the woman who nearly buried the town's history under a fire pit. Jake could almost see the headlines now. She clenched her fists and glared at him, her expression screaming that she'd love nothing more than to strangle him. But with the cameras watching, she had no choice but to swallow her pride. Fine, she gritted out. I apologize for the misunderstanding. Jake grinned. Apology accepted, and I'm sure the town appreciates your generous donation to restore the garden. Karen blinked. Donation. The mayor's representative nodded. Yes, Ms. Turner, given that you caused the damage, I'm sure the town would love for you to fund the official restoration of the community garden. Karen looked absolutely horrified, but with the entire town watching, she couldn't refuse. Through clenched teeth, she muttered, Of course. The crowd cheered. The mayor's representative shook Jake's hand, and Karen. Karen stood there, humiliated, defeated, and now forced to pay for the very thing she tried to destroy. Justice had never tasted so sweet. A week later, Jake stood on his freshly restored lawn, admiring the brand-new garden. Thanks to Karen's generous donation, the town had gone all out. Better soil, more plants than before, and even a decorative plaque commemorating the time Capsule's rediscovery. The best part, the plaque's inscription read, This time Capsule was nearly lost forever, until it was found and saved thanks to local resident Jake Reynolds. Karen's name was nowhere to be seen. Jake smirked as he admired the official ribbon-cutting ceremony being set up by the town. The mayor, the Historical Society, and even some news reporters were back to celebrate. And Karen. She was lurking near the back, sulking like a child forced to sit through a lecture. Oh, don't look so miserable, Jake said as he approached her. I thought you loved making the neighborhood better. Karen shot him a withering glare. I hate you. Jake grinned. Aw, Karen, don't be like that. You got exactly what you wanted, an improvement to the neighborhood. He gestured to the flourishing garden. And thanks to your donation, it's better than ever. Karen huffed and folded her arms. This is not what I wanted. Jake shrugged. Oh well, at least you got to be a part of town history. He pointed at the new plaque. Just not in the way you hoped. Karen looked over, saw her complete lack of credit, and her eye twitched so hard Jake thought she might pop a blood vessel. Before she could respond, the mayor called Jake over to stand beside him for the ribbon cutting. Karen could only watch as Jake basked in the appreciation of the entire town. The moment the scissors snipped through the ribbon, the crowd erupted in applause. Jake took a deep breath, soaking it all in. His garden was back, his land was protected, and Karen had been publicly humiliated, forced to pay thousands, and had nothing to show for it. Justice, poetic and perfect. As the celebration continued, Karen muttered something under her breath and stormed off toward her house. Jake simply smiled and went back to enjoying his victory. For the first time in a long time, peace had been restored to Maplewood Lane.